Hi, gratitude seekers, and welcome to a new episode of the Gratitude Podcast. Today, I have a really special guest for you. Her name is Annabel Abs. And after 15 years running a marketing consultancy company, she took a career break to bring up her 4 children before returning to her first love, literature. But I will let her tell you more about what she's been up to, about her journey, and about what she wants to share with us today. Annabel?
Thank you, Georgian, and thank you very much for asking me to come and talk to you today. This is such an interesting opportunity.
Totally.
So, what shall I start? Shall I start with my move from sort of corporate life? Because I think it's very important in the whole context of thinking about gratitude. So I was originally a corporate person. I ran a company, I set up the company, and then I sold the company after 15 years.
Wow.
And I spent some time looking after my little children. And then I felt the need to do something much more creative. And I wasn't quite sure what it was at first. First of all, I thought I was going to be a photographer. And I went back to art school and I did some photography training, and it wasn't quite right. And then I started writing. I started blogging about 2 different things, actually. And I began researching the story of a young girl growing up in Paris in the 1920s. And she wanted to be a dancer. She was the daughter of a very famous Irish writer called James Joyce. And this was where I really started to discover gratitude. This was sort of the beginning of my gratitude journey, although I didn't know it at the time. And I should say that as a nation, we British people are not particularly grateful. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but we're not really upbeat and positive like the Americans. We tend to be a bit more grumbly. We moan about things. We often see the negatives before we see the positives. And it was while I was researching my story, which is obviously it's a true story. While I was doing all the research, I was going to Paris a lot and to Trieste and to Zurich. I started to realize how very lucky I was actually to have been born in the last 50 years and to be living here in the UK, in fact, in the West, but particularly to be born now with electricity and central heating and food. You can just go to the supermarket and buy anything you want. And all of these things, I suddenly thought, my God, this girl I was writing about, she didn't have that. She couldn't do things. She couldn't vote. She couldn't choose her own clothes. She wasn't allowed to dance on stage because that wasn't something that young women did. And I suddenly began to think, gosh, I'm so lucky. I'm really very lucky. And I've never realized this. So that was sort of the beginning of my journey. And I think it's important because I think when you start to go deep into your imagination, that is when you begin to realize that actually the things that you have and you take for granted, other people don't have. And it's when you realize that other people don't have these things and you climb inside their bodies, you climb into their skin and you start to see the world through their eyes, you really feel what it is to have something. Whereas before that, I just thought, oh, I've got this, I've got that, the fridge is not working, the heating's playing up. I was always moaning about something because it didn't work, or it didn't work as well as I wanted it to, or it wasn't fast enough. And then I began to imagine myself as this young girl in a different country, a different time, who had nothing. It's a sad story, actually, because eventually her brother decides that she's too mentally ill to live in society, and he has her locked up. And of course, in those days, any man could take his sister, his mother, his wife, and have her locked up in a mental asylum for the rest of her life. And I just started to think, my gosh, no one can do that to me. I'm so lucky. But of course, most of us don't go around thinking, oh, I'm really lucky. I'm so grateful that no one can lock me up. Because we take it for granted, because we haven't had that journey. We haven't traveled inside someone else's body, into their head, someone from a different era. So I think moving from a corporate life to a creative life made it much easier for me to start to experience some form of gratitude. Before that, I really hadn't. I probably hadn't ever really felt grateful for anything. I just expected it all. And when it came, it was like, oh, this is quite nice. And then I moved on. So that was the beginning of my journey. And I would always recommend that anyone who feels that they need to develop their imagination, or learn perhaps how to inhabit other people's bodies, either takes up acting. That's a brilliant way of doing this, or tries writing, because then you do see the world through someone else's eyes. And I think that's an important step. It was an important step for me anyway, important step on one's gratitude journey. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Because when we are living our life experience, and we're usually used to the good things, and I'm actually reading a book right now on how this actually works in our brain, and it's really interesting. We tend to forget about the good things that are happening, and we only see the bad things because we are wired this way. So for millions of years we were wired this way so we can survive. And when we're able to put ourselves in someone else's shoes and see life through their eyes and through their experience, it makes a lot of sense. That brings a lot of gratitude for the little things that we have. Like right now, I have some issues with the plumbing, and we can't use the washing machine, or we can't take a shower or a bath. And these simple things, it's like, of course I can take a bath whenever I have the time, of course, usually, but we don't appreciate them. And now when I don't have this, it's like, oh my God, I would love to be able to do that easily, and to not to have to, I don't know, take my clothes to some other place to get them washed and everything. I had that in my house. Isn't this amazing, incredible, actually? But actually, how we met, I actually read an article of yours, and I thought it was brilliant, and I loved the energy, and I love the fact that you are so passionate about gratitude, and you had an interesting experience about it, and I wanted to have you here and to share it with the gratitude seekers of the Gratitude Podcast.
Okay, well, let me share it with you. So I was at a stage in my life where I was feeling a little bit grateful for what I had, but it wasn't a deep feeling of gratitude. It was just it was a good start. It was the first step. But then something happened to me, and this was very recent, about 2 months ago. And I was walking home from a conference, and I had some sort of strange, it was either a seizure or a faint or something. Anyway, I collapsed on the pavement. But I collapsed so hard, and I came down head first. I collapsed so hard that I broke my skull. I fractured it. In fact, it's still cracked. It's broken all the way right across the top, right down to the
my God.
base of my neck. So I was ambulanced to hospital. I went into an A&E department, accident and emergency, and I was unconscious for about 2 hours. And when I came round, I had all these tubes and wires, and I was on all these monitors in hospital, and I didn't know where I was or how I got there or whatever. But for a few days I was there, and I got moved to a ward. And because of the head injuries, I couldn't move. I couldn't walk. Every time I tried to move, everything spun round. It was like being very drunk, or very seasick, but the whole time, and constant vertigo. So I couldn't move without holding on to someone, and it felt horrible. It was just a very unpleasant feeling. Eventually they moved me to another ward, and I had a bed. I was very lucky. I had a bed right by a window, and I sat looking out of the window and looking down onto the street. And below me, all these people were walking their dogs and their pushchairs, and some of them were running, and some were even sprinting. And I was very envious. I really wanted to go for a walk. It was the thing I most longed for, was to walk, just to get up and walk. And I knew I wouldn't be able to for several weeks. And it occurred to me that all the people walking and running and having wonderful experience on 2 legs, it occurred to me that they had no appreciation of that at all. And I felt very angry. I wanted to open the window and shout at them and say, you're so lucky you can walk. Do you know how lucky you are? Because I knew they didn't. I knew they all took it for granted, like I had done for the previous decades. But luckily the window was closed, so I couldn't open it, and I couldn't move to the window anyway. So I just watched them. But I made this mental promise to myself. I said to myself, as soon as I can walk, I'm going to be grateful. Every single day, I get up and stand on 2 feet and just walk across my room and down the stairs. I'm going to say thank you to whoever that I can walk. But I also, while I was lying in hospital, I also thought, that's not going to happen. It's really not going to happen. I'm just going to forget about it. I'm just going to go back to normal. And as you've mentioned, I run a blog, and the blog is really designed to help anyone who wants to have a healthy second half of their life. So it's full of tips and hints on, what to eat and what to do to keep your bones strong and make sure you keep your memory fresh. So while I recuperated in hospital, I just started to sort of Google, and I was quite interested in this gratitude thing. I'd never heard about gratitude as a philosophy. And I started Googling gratitude research, gratitude old age, gratitude health. And all of these reports were popping up one after another from the Harvard Medical School and from various, particularly American universities, where scientists and medics had been researching what happens to people who feel grateful, but specifically people who practice what they call the attitude of gratitude. People who make a conscious effort to practice it in their lives. And I couldn't believe these reports. So I kept Googling a bit more, and more reports popped up saying that people who practiced gratitude had fewer aches and pains, they lived longer, they were happier, they were less prone to depression, and also, relevant to me, they recuperated from illness more quickly. So I thought, right, okay, I want to walk, I've got to start being more grateful. And I realized I had to make a conscious effort to not just think, oh, how lucky I am, but to try and do something about it. And one of the really interesting reports, which you will know all about, but I knew nothing, was a report that showed that it wasn't good enough to think it in your head. You had to make that tangible. You had to write it down in a letter or a journal, or you had to include some sort of ritual, some spoken word. And it was quite funny because years ago, my husband and I, we're not religious. He is an atheist and I am an agnostic. So there's no God in our lives. But years ago, when we had our children, we had a conversation, and I said it would be so nice if we could bring them up to say something like the Lord's Prayer, to say something before meal times. And historically, in Britain, people would say the Lord's Prayer, thank you, God, for what we're about to receive. They would say it before they ate. But now our society is very, very secular. Very few people go to church. No one says prayers. So we thought, what can we do? No, it's just going to be really naff. It's not going to sound right. And we forgot all about it. But as I was doing my research into gratitude, I came across people talking on YouTube, actually, some people talking about how they had brought gratitude into the whole family by using it, talking about the things they were grateful for, particularly before meals. So I said to my husband, I want to start doing that. I'm worried that I'm not going to appreciate my legs. I'm just going to go back to how I was, moaning and complaining. And he was like, yeah, okay, let's try it. And I've got 3 teenage girls and a 11-year-old boy. And I thought, oh, do you know, they're really not going to like this. They're going to think it's really cheesy, and they're going to think it's really uncool, unhip. But my husband was very supportive. He said, no, let's try it. So I came out of hospital and I slowly got better. And the first meal, I went downstairs to the kitchen, walking, feeling very grateful. And I said to my teenage girls, they were also, hanging around, flicking their hair and being very teenagery. I said, right, we're all going to say just one thing that we're grateful for before we eat. And they sort of looked at me and said, what? I said, just one thing. My husband said, yes, come on, we've all got to say one thing. We went around the table and everyone came up with one thing they were grateful for. And at first we felt a bit self-conscious, felt a bit strange. But it went well. And some people were saying, one of my daughters said about 3 things. And even my little boy, he came up with something. And I thought, oh, that's quite nice. And we all felt quite good. We had a nice meal. And then since then, we've tried to keep it going. And it's really, really worked. We do it now before every family meal. So that's weekends, that's lunch and supper in the evening. Every evening we do it. And everyone says something. And if someone doesn't want to say something, they don't have to. We don't make it a rule. But actually, everyone does. And a couple of occasions now, my husband and I, we've forgotten to mention gratitude. We just started eating, and one of my children has said, "Hey, we haven't done gratitude."
Oh,
So
that's so
now
cool.
now we all do it, and if my parents come over, or my husband's parents, they do it as well. So we're trying to sort of spread it out. And the reason that we're doing this is because I came across one report that showed that not only does gratitude have to be tangible, but also if you make it tangible, it spills out. So it ripples out and has a wider effect. And when it has this wider effect, then other people also start feeling grateful as well. So it's much bigger than just me being happy about having my legs back. It's about something much bigger now, and that's where I think gratitude's really exciting. And the research that's coming out, particularly out of American universities, is also really exciting.
Yeah, exactly. I'm remembering an episode that I did several weeks ago. An American multimillionaire was my guest, and he said something like this: that when he began to be grateful, it was really great for the people around him. That he was a much better person and much easier to deal with.
Yes, I'm sure there's some truth in that. But the other thing about, so the other thing I did actually, as well as bringing it into the family, was I tried to write, and I don't do this very often, I tried to write a letter. I've only done about 2 in the last, or since I came out of hospital, where I've just written a letter about the things that I'm grateful for. And I've mentioned specific people where I have their names, and then I've sent it to them on email. And they've started doing that to me as well. And
Wow.
on the days, there are days I think when you don't feel grateful. I have them, everyone has them. And there are really bad times when you go into a very dark place. And I think when you're there in that really dark place, and you've been through a terrible bereavement or a trauma, I don't think gratitude can be forced. And I think when you're there, you have to express those feelings first, anger or grief or whatever it is. But when I feel really on days where I don't feel any gratitude, what has worked in the past is when other people have shared their gratitude with me, and that has helped me to then come out of those dark days and to find my own gratitude again. So I think it's definitely something that works the more people do it and the more people share it.
Exactly. This is really beautiful that you mentioned. I think that when we create an environment in which people are grateful, or at least express their gratitude every once in a while, it makes it so much easier for you to be grateful, because when for you it's harder to be grateful, you have the other people that if you are low, they might be high. They might be really
Yes.
happy and really grateful, and they might get you up also. And it's beautiful that by you setting an example for your family and your friends supported you in when you weren't that grateful. And I think this is brilliant. This is a great tip for our listeners, and it's really beautiful that you mentioned it.
I think also that's why I know a lot of people do gratitude journals, particularly in America. It's not such a big thing here. In fact, gratitude is not such a big thing in the UK. But the thing about a gratitude journal, for me, the reason I haven't done one is because it's a very private thing. So occasionally I might write something on a piece of paper before I go to sleep and just put it in my drawer. But for me, the public gratitude, I think, works better than the journal. So I don't do the journal, but I know that works for a lot of people.
Yeah, it does. I am not a big fan of gratitude journaling. I think it's great, but I'm always focusing on the feeling. So I'm always trying to feel the gratitude more than just write things that could make me grateful, because I tend to, when I write usually things like this, I tend to be more in my mind rather than what I'm feeling. So maybe this is a guy thing or something, but it
Yeah,
usually
well,
it helps with feeling it and just saying thank you out loud, or saying thank you like a mantra somehow, and that gets me feeling grateful. and suddenly I get to see all the beautiful things in my life and the things that I'm grateful for. And this works better for me than just writing 3 things or something like this, and afterwards going about my life and forgetting about gratitude at all.
Well, I agree with you. I feel the same way, actually. I think there's so many benefits to having it sort of more public than perhaps in a journal.
Exactly. And like, was it hard to convince your partner and your family to embrace this, or how was it for you?
No, it was surprisingly easy, very easy actually. And I mean, I hope so. So my first daughter leaves home in a few months. She goes off to university. So I hope that she will take that practice with her. She might not, and it might be really uncool when she gets to university. But I hope that perhaps she will try it. And if it doesn't work for her then, because it's too uncool or whatever, perhaps she will come back to it later in life. So I think it can work like that, in the same way that people who have been brought up in a more religious family might come back to, they might go away for a bit, and then 30s or 40s they'll come back to it. But of course we've never been a religious family, so there's no traditional faith for anyone to come back to. So perhaps gratitude will take the place of that, if you like.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's a really beautiful ritual to have in family, and I'm sure that that will have a positive effect in the long term as well. And hopefully, if the gratitude podcast will grow as I hope, it will be cool for young people also to do this, and for her to continue the practice. Because as I'm reading this book right now, um, we are wired to be, let's say, like you said about the British people, to think about what's not going okay and all kinds of things like this. And in order for us to rewire this, we need to bring a lot of positive experiences and to make this constant. And the thing is that our brain wants to protect us, and um, if we give it positive experiences, it will protect us even better. Actually, this is the funny thing, because it will be in a more harmonious state, and all of the things that we need to do in this world, and all of the challenges that we have, when we are in that state, it's much easier for us to take care of everything. And it's really interesting because it's like counterintuitive. You would think that if you're on the lookout all the time for what might go wrong, it might be more useful. But actually, if you're in a better state and you're grateful and you're feeling great, it's much more easier for your brain to deal with everything that's going on in life.
Yes, I think that's right. That sounds a very interesting book.
Yeah, it is. Hardwiring happiness, I think.
Hardwiring happiness.
Yeah.
Okay, is that by an American?
Most probably.
Or most probably, yes. They're very good at gratitude.
Yeah, there's a lot of research on gratitude, and on the human brain, and on this positivity part of life.
Yes. It seems to come more naturally. Well, it seems to come very naturally to them, to a lot of them. I mustn't generalize.
Yeah. So I can't think. So I can understand why British people can be more. I don't know, more moany, or how you said it, because the weather there isn't very helpful. Like, I've been to
No.
Britain, and it's like all the time you might get a rain, or
Rain.
the weather might change really fast, and all kinds of things like this, and that it's really hard to be very cheerful and sunny and everything if the weather isn't like that, because it does influence us. We're human, and we love sunny weather. We love it
Yes. But yes,
when we can
the
feel free to
sun.
be ourselves. Yeah.
The sun definitely has a huge impact, I think, on how upbeat we feel. But on the other hand, we need to feel grateful that I'm looking out of my window now and it's very, very green out there. The trees are green, everything is green. And that's because we have so much rain. So sometimes it's about reframing your experience, isn't it? It's about looking at something and instead of thinking, oh, it's always gloomy, it's looking at it and thinking, gosh, it's so beautiful and green. But that's because, it's about to rain in a minute. So I quite like this idea of reframing things so that we feel excitement rather than fear, and we feel some positive feelings rather than negative emotions.
Yeah, totally. And it's really important, and it really does have an impact on the brain. And I'm really happy that I found this book and this research on the brain, because I I always felt that it's happening in my life. Like I was happiest all the time when I was grateful. For me, it was really easy. When I was focusing on the beautiful things that were working in my life, I was really happy. And when I got this to be a habit, it was exhilarating. So I loved life, everything. Even if there were challenges, I was able to deal with them in a different way. And I'm really happy that I found this research that we can build this up in our brain, because we have all kinds of neural pathways that keep us alive, that keep us away from danger, and they are really important. And it's normal because we've been constructed this way so we can survive. But when we construct new neural pathways, we can see life differently. But this needs practice, like you said. It's really important to practice, otherwise it's really hard.
Well, it's such a simple thing to practice. If, as all these American reports suggest, if gratitude, the practice of it, really does help people to have a healthier life. In other words, you're not having to go into hospital so often, which means you're not being a burden on the National Health Service. You're not taking up taxpayers' money by being in hospital. If that's the case, then we really should all be doing it, because it's such a simple, cheap, well, it's free, isn't it? It's a simple, free thing that anyone can do. You can do it anywhere, and it could have such an enormous impact on how we live our lives in the second half of our lives.
Yeah, totally. And I was just wondering, you said that you weren't grateful for all of your life. If you could go back in time, what would you tell your younger self about gratitude, like 10 years ago or 20 years ago?
That's such a good question. I think if I would go back and I would meet someone who was practicing gratitude, because I don't think I was ready to find it myself. But if I had come across someone earlier in my life, perhaps when I was a teenager, perhaps if my parents had done gratitude at the table, or perhaps if when I was a teenager I'd met someone who wrote me little notes. I have a friend now who writes me little letters all the time about what she's grateful for. Perhaps if I'd met her when I was 18 or 19, I would have thought, oh, this is quite nice. But I don't think when I was young, I don't think it was ready to come. And in fact, quite a lot of people I've spoken to since, and a lot of people responded to the blog post you talked about. A lot of people said that it was that brush with death. It was coming face to face with death, or potential death, that made them realize how lucky they were to be alive and what a privilege it was to be alive. And I think when you're young, you don't come face to face with danger or illness of that magnitude so often. It's when you get older you start to have more close shaves with death or with very serious illness. So perhaps it can't always be forced. Perhaps it comes when it's meant to come. Perhaps I was meant to be a late developer.
Yeah, totally.
But I hope not. I hope everyone else sees it before I did.
Well, this is why the Gratitude Podcast exists, actually, because
and
people.
You're very young.
Yeah, thank you. Because people like you who have discovered gratitude, because many people know about gratitude as a concept, as okay, you have to feel grateful or you have to say thank you or things like this. But people that actually live it, that have actually experienced this is what I wish for the people listening to us right now, to be inspired by your story and to be inspired by your situation and learn from your experience and see the impact that gratitude can have, and the fact that they don't need to actually go through what you went through to discover it and to feel it. They might be actually lucky enough to just be inspired by you and
Or by
feel the
you.
gratitude. Thank you.
By your podcast, hopefully. Yes, that would be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah, totally. So this is what why I'm doing this, and
Mm.
um, I think it's much easier for people to actually get to this earlier in life, like I am right now. I know about gratitude, I feel gratitude, and I'm uncovering more and more, because it's really interesting that even though I'm doing this like for 1 year or so, um, these interviews I'm talking about, I'm still discovering new things. And even though I've talked by now with more than 40 people or so about gratitude, I still learn new things. And the way, for instance, the way you experience gratitude and the way you um, practice it is really unique. And it brings another perspective on gratitude, which is really interesting and might resonate with many people.
I hope so.
So you were mentioning um, that you have people in your life that you're grateful for. Would you like to mention a few people and why you're grateful for them?
Well, I think, like everyone, I'm obviously grateful to my friends and family. So everyone says that, but I think actually what has been really interesting to me is how grateful I am to strangers, and how grateful I often am to people I have no idea who they are, which is a shame because I'll never get to thank them. But there are a lot of people that I'm grateful to. I don't know who they are, but quite often they're people who just smile at me, people who smile and say good morning. We don't do so much of that in Britain. I don't know, maybe there's more of that in your country. But that always cheers me up. A total stranger just smiling and saying good morning. And I'd like to thank all of the strangers, all the people that have smiled at me and said good morning or good afternoon, even though they don't know me, even though I'm probably walking along with a very grumpy face. They've gone out of their way to do that. And also there were some people in hospital. There were a couple of women on either side of me in hospital. I don't know who they are because I couldn't really concentrate in hospital. My brain wasn't working at all well. But they were both the most extraordinary women. They were both single mothers. They both had 5 children. One had just had a new kidney, and she'd been having dialysis for 8 years, going into hospital to have dialysis 3 or 4 times a week. And these women were so extraordinary. They really kept my spirits up in hospital. They talked across me. I couldn't join in the conversation, but I just listened. And they talked across me about how they fed their children and all the problems they had. And neither of them had much money. Neither of them had anything particular. They obviously hadn't had very privileged lives in any way, but they were so resilient and so resourceful. And I don't even know their names, but I would really like to thank them because they reminded me and still remind me constantly of how lucky I am. So isn't that funny how quite often we feel gratitude to people we don't know?
Yeah, totally. And I think this is really beautiful that you mentioned, because when we think about gratitude, we think of course of the people around us and the friends, family, and we tend to forget the little things, the little gestures, like someone holding the door for us, or something really simple that people do for us that they're not obligated to do. And it's really beautiful that we live in a society that um, is okay with this. Like, not just okay, but people are doing this in
Yes.
in our society, and it's really beautiful. And this is one of the things that the book was referring to, the fact that when we are in two kinds of states in our brain. I'm not so sure exactly which what the states are, but the one where when we focus on gratitude and on the positives, um, we tend to become better people, and we tend to because we don't feel threatened by the exterior, and we don't feel like we have to attack, or we have
Mm,
to like fight or flight. We don't have to fight anyone, and we don't have to run away from anyone. We become better people, and uh, like you said, we smile more, and we smile to strangers, and we make each other's days more beautiful. And I think it's really awesome that you mentioned this.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I just wish I could thank all these people. But it would be a bit strange if someone smiled at me and I said thank you. So I suppose you thank them in a way, don't you, by smiling back and saying good morning back. But then you take that to the next stranger who's walking along, who perhaps isn't smiling or isn't looking very happy. Then I know it's my turn to smile at them and say good morning, and then perhaps they will take it on to the next
Exactly.
person. So it has a sort of a chain effect.
Yeah, and also saying thank you within yourself. I think that's great as well. I also wrote a short article on feeling gratitude when you say thank you, because saying thank you is a social norm. Like
Yes,
we
I saw that. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you. Saying this is like, okay, you just say thank you because you have to say thank you because this is how it goes in society. But when you actually give yourself the time and the permission and the awareness to actually feel the gratitude when you say thank you, it's an amazing feeling. And I recommend this to you and to our listeners. It's really awesome.
Yes, that was a really interesting piece that you wrote.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm trying to absorb it. I'm trying to.
Exactly, because when you actually do what you said right now, that you observe it and you get to do it in your own life, the ripple effect is amazing.
Yes, and it's that same idea, isn't it, of reframing something. So reframing thank you, because it's the same thing really, isn't it? But then reframing it so that it's sort of slightly different and more of an expression of gratitude.
Totally. So I absolutely loved our time together. um, and I want our listeners to know more about you and know where to find you or where to contact you, if you can say a few words about that.
Well, they can go to my website, which is www.annabelabs, ANNABELABBS.com, and that's my website for my novel and my writing, my journalism. Or they can go to the blog that I do with a friend, which is called www.kaleandcoco.com, and that's full of the latest research and various recipes for things that you can do and eat to ensure that you have a long and healthy and happy old age.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for being here with us and for sharing your experience. I also, one more thing I wanted to talk with you about. Did you see any relation? So I've seen this, so I'm asking to see if you have seen it as well, between health and gratitude. Like how you manage to feel grateful when you're feeling more or less healthy.
Do you mean how it's helped me to feel healthier?
Yes, and if like when you, I don't know, you've eaten something that it doesn't feel really good or something. I'm talking about minor health issues, not something that you need to go to a hospital to for.
Minor health issues. Well, I haven't had any, so I haven't been able to say whether gratitude has helped with that, but it certainly did possibly help me recover from my head injuries. But I don't know, because I didn't do it without the gratitude, so I can't say for sure. But it made me feel better about my recovery. I felt my recovery was perhaps progressing more quickly. But a lot of the research which has been done, done properly under the proper sort of research circumstances, does seem to suggest that people do feel physically better. And one of the interesting things was that people who feel grateful, and particularly people who practice gratitude before they go to sleep, they sleep better. They have a better night's sleep. So I think that's a very interesting finding for people for insomnia, all insomniacs out there. It's just something you can try.
Totally. And what I wanted to share was my experience regarding eating healthy.
Oh yes, let's hear.
So I've experienced and I've found out that the healthier I eat, the easier it is for me to feel gratitude and to feel grateful.
Oh really?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because I am in a better state, and I don't have all kinds of I don't know, aches and pains that might take my attention actually. And by feeling better and eating healthier, it's much easier for me to feel grateful. And that's why I asked you. I was thinking whether or not you've tried this. So when you ate something that wasn't as healthy, or for a
Ah,
while you were eating something that wasn't as healthy, and eating healthy. So this has been an experiment that I did in my life, and I saw that it makes a big difference.
oh, that's really interesting. So you see good or healthy, wholesome eating sort of moving alongside your practice of gratitude in your life, and each one so you feel more grateful because you eat well, and you eat well because you feel more grateful in a
Yeah,
sort of
exactly. It's a virtuous circle.
a virtuous circle. Yeah. Wow, that sounds fantastic. I like the sound of that.
Yeah, totally. So
Yeah, I might write about that. I'll write about you.
thank you. So this is something that you could try, and our listeners can try and
Mm,
see how it goes, because in my experience it has worked extremely well. So the one supports the other, and it's really
yes,
beautiful when you get them going.
yes. Oh, I really like the sound of that. Yeah,
All right.
I'll do some research and see if that's statistically the case.
All right, perfect. I'm happy with that. So thank you so much for being here with us, and for accepting my invitation. It has been great having you here. Don't forget, gratitude seekers, to go to Annabelle's website and check her out. Check her writings. She's awesome. Thank you once again for being here.
Thank you.